Damas and Aaron, welcome to Island Voices. Please hit the red subscribe button to the right of your screen and welcome aboard. Folks, today's guest made his debut in professional baseball for the New York Yankees in 1990. He has said, "My defining moment came on October 23rd, 1996, in front of 52,000 fans while millions more watched on TV around the world." But then he goes on to explain, "I had become tricked into thinking that somehow, because so many wonderful things had happened to me in such a short time, that my fortune would continue. Little did I know that my life and struggles were just beginning. The results would not always garner ticker tape." This is a very interesting man, and one who possesses remarkable courage and inner strength. And now, this podcast is about the incredible history of this incredible place that we now call New York. And while this guest's time in New York took place at the tail end of the 20th century, I am quite certain that he would have fit in just as well here in the 17th, 18th, or 19th century, maybe even better. Because what I've come to learn about him, I would say that his grit and tenacity would have been greatly admired by the likes of Walloon Pierre Menuet, and by Huguenot Jean de la Montagne, or by my own uncle, Honest John Kelly, who was tasked with putting together the pieces of Tammany Hall in the wake of the Boss Tweed era. All of these men, impactful founders who helped to shape this place into what it is today. One veteran teammate said of this guest, "Sometimes Jimmy told people what they didn't want to hear. He was straight up." And of himself, he has said quite plainly, "I don't like fake people." No wonder I like this guy. And I couldn't be happier to welcome him to the podcast, because in spite of having to fight for every at-bat he ever took in the majors over his 11-year career, he is a relentless doer. In sports terms, we call him clutch. And he will always have a special place in the hearts of Yankee fans for his postseason heroics. As Bob Costas famously announced, "You could send this guy to a resort during the spring and summer, as long as he comes back in October." Now that is one hell of a legacy, especially in a place like New York. Damas and Aaron, mesdames et messieurs, damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen, I am infinitely honored to introduce you to a man who has fought for everything he has, whose faith in God and family helped shape and guide him through the peaks and valleys of a career in Major League Baseball, a career that had him contribute pivotal home runs in not one, but two different World Series victories for the greatest baseball team of all time, our very own New York Yankees. And all that aside, he is a wonderful father and a great example to parents everywhere. This is Mr. Jim Leyritz. Welcome in here.
Hey, how we doing?
Good, Jim. How are you?
Oh, thank you for that introduction. Very nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. I enjoyed getting to know about you and your career. You have, a lot of people think that pro athletes have it made, and everything is glory and glamour and money and glitz. You had a little bit of a different career, journey, didn't you?
Yeah. My journey was quite different. I mean, the odds of me even seeing a day in the big leagues from never being drafted were millions to one. I mean, there was no reason why, even just to see the big leagues, much less last 11 years. Because I was never drafted. I was overlooked. I broke my leg out of high school 2 days before the draft, so they passed on me. And then I never really got another opportunity until I was playing in a collegiate league in Kansas. And the Yankees saw me playing, and they were there actually to watch another player named Dave Hollins, who was playing for another team. And I had a great series, and they said, "You know what, you want to sign?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I ended up signing with the New York Yankees, and it turned out pretty good.
Is it fair to say, would you consider yourself an overachiever?
Oh, yeah. I think, I was raised with a father who, if anybody knows sports, a cross between Woody Hayes and Bobby Knight.
Yeah, he could push you a little bit.
Yes, you couldn't be timid. You couldn't be timid. Uh, growing up with my father really prepared me for working for George Steinbrenner. Um, he was very hard on me. If I scored 20 points in a basketball game, why didn't you score 30? If I went 2 for 4, why didn't you go 3 for 4? As a matter of fact, one of the greatest stories I ever tell is the day I got called up to the big leagues, my first time ever in Yankee Stadium after I came up in Baltimore and then we went back home to New York. I walked into Yankee Stadium. I saw the monuments. I saw everything. I walk into the locker room. My locker is next to Don Mattingly. And I'm just taking all this in on my first day at Yankee Stadium. And to top it off, we're playing the Red Sox that night. So I call my dad on the phone and I said, "Hey, Dad, listen, I made it." He said, "What are you talking about?" I explained to him what I just experienced. He goes, "Jimmy, that's awesome. Very, very good. But tell me what you're going to do to stay there." That was my father's things. Okay, you reached one goal. What's your next?
Yeah.
Okay, don't ever be satisfied until you have what you want. And my father knew that I wanted to be like my Cincinnati Reds that I grew up in the 70s with. I wanted to win a World Series. I wanted to be part of that. And just getting to the big leagues wasn't my goal. And I always had that kind of drive pushed from my father. And then, of course, once I got with the Yankees, Mr. Steinbrenner was the next one to push those buttons.
You threw out some big names in that story, Jim. Don Mattingly, George Steinbrenner, your dad. I know the impact he had on you because I read your book, and I think your relationship with him is beautiful. And I am a father, and I understand a lot of those sentiments. Now, talk to me about some of those names. You had a special relationship with George Steinbrenner, didn't you?
Yeah, George and I first met. I was my second year in the minor leagues. We used to work out at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and Mr. Steinbrenner was a big supporter of Gainesville, of University of Florida. And we were at a basketball game one night, myself, Scott Lusader, and Chris Lombardozzi, two other minor league guys, and they show on the jumbotron, Mr. Steinbrenner's at the game. And now I have my Yankee top on, my Yankee necklace, and I'm a minor leaguer, for the Yankees. And I said to Scott Lusader and Chris Lombardozzi, "Hey, let's go down and meet Mr. Steinbrenner." And they're like, "Dude, you don't do that. You don't talk to George Steinbrenner." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So I said, "Screw that. I'm going down there." So I went down, and his security guard Eddie was sitting at the front of the row. And I walked up to him and I said, "Sir, can I say hello to Mr. Steinbrenner?" And he saw my jacket and my necklace. He goes, "Oh, are you a Yankee fan?" I said, "No, I'm one of the minor leaguers." He's like, "Oh, yeah, go ahead." So there was 4 empty seats. Then Mr. Steinbrenner. I went and I sat down next to Mr. Steinbrenner, and he kind of looked at me, and I went to shake his hand. I said, "How you doing, Mr. Steinbrenner? My name is Jim Leyritz." I said, "It's a pleasure to meet you." And he looked at my jacket again. He, just like the security guy, goes, "Oh, you a Yankee fan?" I said, "No, sir, you signed my paycheck." He's like, "What?" And I said, "I'm one of your minor leaguers." I said, "A couple guys are here. They were afraid to come down and say hello. I wanted to meet you. So here I am, pleasure to meet you." He stopped. He took out a piece of paper and a pen. And he said, "By the way, what's your name again?" And I said, "Jim Leyritz." And he wrote my name down. That was the first time I ever met Mr. Steinbrenner. In 1990, I got called up, like I mentioned, my first time going in the stadium. We're playing the Red Sox. I get to pinch hit against Roger Clemens in the 8th inning, and I get a base hit. And I come into the locker room afterwards, and on my chair, now you got to remember, 1990, Mr. Steinbrenner was suspended. He wasn't even with the team. Yeah. On my chair was a bottle of champagne and a note from George Steinbrenner that said, "Congratulations, kid. You said you'd be here." He remembered and somehow contacted somebody to put that on my chair to let me know that, hey, I'm watching you.
It's amazing, because I'm a New Yorker, and I remember when I first heard Steinbrenner's name, and it's easy. It was easy to, if you listen to some of the press, to dislike Steinbrenner or think he was a jerk or think he was oppressive or have any kind of negative thoughts about him. And again, if you're not in the game, if you're not in the major leagues, you don't know him. I mean, all you know is what you see on TV. That was the image that was illustrated of Steinbrenner when I was growing up. Tell me more about that, because the more I read and understand and learn about who he was and hear from people like you, I think he sounds like he was a phenomenal man.
Yeah, listen, Mr. Steinbrenner was a tough boss for somebody that worked in the organization. As a player, we loved him because he said to us, what do you need? Okay, I'll go get that. But guess what? If I get it and I pay for it, you better win. You better perform. And there's nothing wrong, and he always said that. And that was the one thing as a player you appreciated. Now, would I have wanted to work in his front office? Probably not. He might be a little bit scary as a boss if I wasn't a player. But the one great thing that I loved about him was, well, actually, there was two things. One was his charity and his giving side that he never let anybody know. Mr. Steinbrenner would read an article in the paper of somebody that got shot in the line of duty and their family was left without a father or a mother or whatever, left without a parent. And he would call up and say, listen, I'm going to give this family this much money for 5 years, every year for 5 years. But if one person finds out about it, it's done. I'm giving it. And he had a saying from the charity side that if you do something for somebody and more than one person has to know about it, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Wow. That's amazing.
That part was amazing. And what happened was all of these people kept quiet until he passed away. And once he passed away, then people told these stories about all of this philanthropic stuff that he did in New York, that he did in Tampa. And just what a great, great man he was. And that was number one. Number two that I learned from George Steinbrenner was when I wasn't in the lineup and he was down there during batting practice, walking on the field, and I wasn't in the lineup, he'd come up to me and say, hey, Leyritz, you in the lineup? I said, no, Mr. Steinbrenner, not today. He goes, skip batting practice. Go down there to right field and start signing autographs for your fans. They're the ones that pay your bill. Wow. And he would have us go down and sign autographs. And that's just the kind of guy that he really was. But as a boss, he wanted that General Patton, persona. And that's the one thing that we always talk about, being a celebrity, being an athlete. We're in the public a lot. Mr. Steinbrenner was in the public a lot. The persona that the media gave him was not the character of George Steinbrenner. And that's the one thing people, I think, tend to forget sometimes is we're judged on a persona because of what the media talks about us, what people see on TV, not for what people don't see behind closed doors. And that's the difference, again, in Mr. Steinbrenner.
I think it's an example of being a father has a certain set of requirements, being a boss has another set of requirements, and being a friend has an entirely different set of requirements, but being a human, yet another set of requirements. And he applied each as it was applicable. And,
yeah, one of my greatest stories, again, of his loyalty is in 1996, I hit the home run. The season ends and my agents are talking to George about my next contract. And I have one more year left on my contract. And they're talking to him and they said, if Jimmy doesn't play every day, can we pursue a trade? Right. And George said, absolutely. What he's done for us, I'll give him that opportunity, because he contacted Torrey and he contacted Cashman Bob Watson, and said, is Jimmy going to play every day next year? And they said, probably not. He'll probably be in the same role that he was in 96. So George called my agents and said, go ahead, try to pursue something. So I was living in Tampa at the time, working out in the minor league fields. And all of a sudden I get called off the field and into the locker room. And I go in, I get the phone, it's my agents. Hey, we just worked a trade. You're going to Anaheim. You got a 3-year contract and you're going to be the everyday catcher in Anaheim. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Yeah. So I packed up my bag and I walked into Mr. Steinbrenner's office to thank him. And I said, Mr. Steinbrenner, I just got off the phone with my agents, who he was best friends with, Tom Rich and Adam Katz. And I said, hey, thank you for giving me this opportunity to go play every day somewhere. And he says, well, what are you doing with your bag? I said, well, I'm not a Yankee anymore. I can't work out here. He said, son, go unpack your bag. You will always be a Yankee. There's only 2 players that I will let ever come back that are no longer with the team. And that's you and Wade Boggs. And you guys can work out here as long as you want.
Amazing. That was one of my favorite parts of the book when you mentioned that. I thought that was really telling, really telling. You have a lot of good stories. You told me actually when we first talked before the interview, something it was a little surprising to me. When you were with the Yanks in the 90s, your first stay, you were one of the first guys who actually lived in Manhattan. And most those guys, I know they lived up this way, they lived up near Westchester, out in Long Island, whatever. Most of them got shuttled to the games or, got rides, whatever. Maybe they drove. How'd you get to the games?
The old silver limo, the 4 train. Yeah. And I really had my agent at the time when I first got signed or I got called up. My agent at the time was a New Yorker. And he said, Jimmy, when you come back from Baltimore, I want you to stay in the city in a hotel. And I want you to take the 4 train to the stadium. I want you to get off and walk down the steps and walk in the back entrance of Yankee Stadium. And I was like, first of all, I'm a kid from Cincinnati, Ohio. I got a cowboy hat, cowboy boots. You want me to take a 4 train? Are you kidding me? But I did it. And sure enough, I walked out. And as soon as you walk in the back entrance of the old stadium from the subway, you walk right into Monument Park. And that's what he wanted me to see. He wanted me to see the history because I wasn't a Yankee fan growing up. I was a Cincinnati Reds, big red machine. And so he wanted me to take that in and just get the experience. And then once I did that, we went out 2 nights later in the city, had dinner. And he said, honestly, because I will tell you this, Jimmy, if you don't know how long you're going to be a Yankee. And this is one of the greatest cities in the world. Stay here, find an apartment in the city and just be a New Yorker. And he goes, enjoy that experience because we don't know how long it's going to last. And you know what? For 6 years, I lived in New York City. I had my cowboy hat, my cowboy boots. I took the 4 train every single day. And, my mother and father from Cincinnati, Ohio go, aren't you afraid that, something's going to happen to you on those trains? Because those subways are dangerous. I said, Mom and Dad, I've got a cowboy hat and cowboy boots. They think I'm carrying something. They're not going to mess with me.
Jimmy Leyritz isn't afraid of anything. After reading your book, I'm convinced of that. That is awesome. And I think that has a lot to do with you falling in love with this city, the city that you call your home away from home now. Now you took a teammate off on the subway one time by necessity. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was one of probably my greatest stories that I tell people all the time because it was the first time and the only time in his life that Derek Jeter took a subway. All right. So we had been out the night before, out all night. We overslept. We missed the bus.
Well, wait, you just won the World Series, correct?
Yeah, we just won the 90s.
Okay, so it's the big night, right?
Yep. We had been out celebrating for 3 or 4 days. The parade was the next day. That night we were out really late. We ended up oversleeping. Derek lived 2 blocks from me and we missed the bus. And I said, hey, Derek, just come down by my apartment. I'm taking my son and my 2-year-old son and my wife. And, we'll figure out a way to get down. And so he came down, we came out, there was a couple police officers on the corner. And I said, hey guys, they of course recognized me. And I said, hey, we missed the bus to get to the parade. Can you guys give us an escort? And he's like, Jimmy, all the streets are shut down. We can't even get down there, much less take you down there. And I looked at Derek, I said, gee, we're jumping on the train, brother. That's the only way we can get there. And so we go down to the subway and, back then there was no cell phones. People had cameras, but it wasn't like the cell phone craziness that you would normally get now. And we jumped on the train and, I had my son, my 2-year-old and my wife, and we take the train all the way down. And
he had never been on the subway, right?
He was scared to death. He tells the story all the time. Like I did not want to do this because, I was scared. And so we took it all the way down and we made the parade. And, but yeah, funny, one of the funniest stories because he never took a subway again after that.
Wow. That is so cool. You really became a New Yorker, didn't you?
I think that's one of the things the Yankee fans really appreciated is what I was doing in the community. being a part of the community. I did a lot of things with the PAL and all of the NYPD and the FDNY, and just a lot of stuff that really made me feel part of New York. And yet they felt like, hey, he really is a true player that wants to be part of our community too. And just the relationships and the friendships that I have still to this day is one of the friendliest cities out of the 6 cities that I played in.
It's really a misconception, isn't it, that New Yorkers are not friendly? They're friendly in a very specific, down-to-earth way, aren't they? But they're direct. They're direct.
Well, and they're loyal. They're loyal. If you treat them with respect, if you treat them important, you will get the same in return. Yeah. Because again, like I said, to me, it's one of the friendliest cities that I've ever been in.
Awesome. We have a lot of people really interested in this interview. There's a lot of baseball fans that listen. Rob from Rockland County wants to know. Now, let me point out, Rob is a serious baseball fan. He got married at home plate at Cooperstown, New York. So this dude is serious about his baseball. He points out that you played for 2 legendary managers, Joe Torre, a guy who's sort of solidified already, and another guy who's sort of in the process of really solidifying his legacy, Buck Showalter. Tell us some of the differences of playing for those 2 specific managers, and what each brings to the table, and what each brought to your career.
Yeah, it's one of those things that people always say, nobody has everything. Nobody has, the baseball knowledge, also the personal knowledge, or a way to deal with people. When Buck first came up with me, we had been together for 5 years or 4 years in the minor leagues.
Right, you were in the minors with him, right?
Yeah. And to this day, I was the second player who played the most games with Buck Showalter as my manager. The other one was Adam Jones of Baltimore. And Buck and I, he just really taught people what it was like to be a Yankee in the minor leagues. He stressed the discipline. He stressed how important it was to put on that pinstripe uniform. And then to play with him in the big leagues, one of the smartest managers, 3 steps ahead of every other manager that I've ever seen. I'd be sitting on the bench and he'd be, hey, Jimmy, come here, watch this. I'm going to do this and they're going to do this. And sure enough, he would do it and they would play right into his hand. He was one of the smartest managers I ever played with. The only knock on Buck in the early days is that he didn't quite know how to deal with personalities. He wasn't a very personable manager. And Joe Torre, on the other hand, baseball knowledge was good, but not great. That's why he with the National League, St. Louis, New York, that he didn't really pan out there. But man, there is no better person that knows how to handle egos, to handle personalities, like myself included, right? Like Roger Clemens, like these big names that would come into play, that he really stressed, hey, you're no more important than my 25th guy on my roster. This is a team and you will play as a team. And he really knew how to deal with personalities. One of the greatest managers of people that I ever met. Wow. So there was the difference in the 2 managers. Yeah. And then I think what Joe Torre did so well is he put Don Zimmer next to him, who was Mr. Baseball, who knew everything baseball. And that combination of him and Joe and Zimmer together was one of the greatest combinations of a coach and a bench coach.
Right. That made up any gap in the ability pool. He melded it with, he bridged it with Zimmer being there.
And I got to give Joe credit. Joe knew that after getting fired with, the other jobs that he had, that this was his last shot. He went back to New York. He was a Yankee manager. He was a New Yorker. He was coming back home. And if he didn't make this one, okay, you fail. Well, instead of being afraid, which a lot of managers are, to hire people that might take your job, he went out and got Zimmer. He went out and got Mel Stoudemire. He went out and got Willie Randolph, Chris Chambliss, all these other guys that eventually at some point managed another team. And he was not afraid to have those people. And that coaching staff that we had, as a player, there was not one instance that I can remember that any of the guys on our team didn't listen to what our coaches were telling us, because they had more experience than we ever could think about having up until that point.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting to me to think of some of these sports coaches and managers in other realms. And it sounds like Torrey would have been a great business manager, a CEO or a COO or something. He sounds like
and that's why he's the second in charge in baseball right now.
Yeah.
You know, because he knows how to work both sides. He knows how to bring people together, to get people to drop their egos and their pride, to say, hey, what is for the betterment of all of us? Let's do that. And that's where Joe was second to none.
Awesome. Another listener, Tony V from White Plains, wants to hone in on Showalter a bit more. You played for him with the Yanks when he was the younger manager, as you mentioned. And now, as things tend to happen, he's one of the oldest, and he's with the other squad from town here. He's with the Mets. From your viewpoint, how has Buck's situation changed in this career-long relationship with New York, both as the game and the city as well? How has the situation changed for him?
Yeah, you know what? I think the best thing that happened to Buck is he went on TV for a couple years. And he really developed a personality, and he really became a little bit more lighthearted and open to more things. And really, that's what it took, I think, for him. And I remember when he was managing in Baltimore, Jim Thome was playing there, and Jimmy and I were good friends. And I was talking to Jimmy one day because I was working for MLB.com and ESPN, and I was talking to Jimmy about, hey, what's it like playing for Buck? And he was the first one to say, you know what, Jimmy, I know early on he had a bad rap, but man, he is so good with all of our players, the younger ones and the older ones. And that wasn't the way he was early on. And to hear that from a guy like Jim Thome, who's one of the most respected guys in the game, really made me understand, you know what? Buck has really turned the corner. And I remember when his name come up for the Mets, I remember talking to my good buddies that are Mets fans saying, dude, if you guys get Showalter, it's going to change everything, because he can take what's been missing at the Mets and he can help make it happen. And so far, so good. I mean, what he's done so far is pretty much, I think, the future of what the Mets are going to be like.
It's really looking good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And by the way, just for the record, I was born a Met fan.
Okay.
by heritage, but I'm a Yankee fan as well. I'm a New York fan. I'm not one of these guys, but it's always good to see the orange and blue, you know.
Right. I'm always a Yankee, but I root for every New York team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I root for the Mets until they play the Yankees.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And I got to go for the Mets, even though you guys kicked their ass in the series. There's one more question from Rich in Queens. Who says, you know, and I think a lot of fans agree, the Game 4 home run was just about one of the best things he's ever seen. What were you looking for from Wohlers on that pitch at that point? Because I know there had been many pitches. It was, you'd taken a whole bunch of pitches at that point. What were you thinking was coming, and what was it that he threw?
Yeah, it was a 6-pitch at bat. And the count was 2-2 when I hit it. He had just thrown me on a 2-2 count, a slider, and I just barely fouled it off. And as the catcher, the next thing I'm thinking, okay, fastball in. And this guy throws 100 miles an hour. If he throws a fastball in, I'm not going to be able to get to it. So I took about a half a step off the plate. And that way, if he threw in, I could take the pitch and know that would be ball 3. I think he saw me move away. Him and I have never talked about it to this day.
Really?
I've never heard him talk about it to anybody else.
Wow.
But I think by seeing me step off a little bit, that he thought he could throw another slider out there and get me. And sure enough, you know, I was looking fastball. And sure enough, he threw the slider, he hung it. I was able to stay back and hit it. And, you know, all I could think about rounding the bases was, hey, this just tied up the game. And if we don't win this game, it's going to be like my 95 walk-off home run against Seattle. That was one of the greatest home runs I've ever hit. but we didn't win the series. So the home run became a footnote.
Right.
We didn't want this home run to become a footnote. We ended up winning. It changed the momentum of the World Series. We went on to win it, and it became one of the biggest home runs to start that Yankee dynasty of the late 90s.
Right. And for people that might not remember the game, refresh the memory of, you guys were really down. I think you were down by how many points? 6?
Yeah, we had just won game 3 the night before.
Right.
Kenny Rogers took the mound, and everybody questioned Joe Torre for starting Kenny Rogers. And sure enough, it panned out that he probably shouldn't have. And we were down 6-0. And then we started coming back in the sixth inning, and we got a couple runners on, and all of a sudden, Mark Wohlers jumps up in their bullpen. And Wohlers at the time was their #1 closer. He was like the Mariano Rivera of the Braves at the time. He had just got the last out of the 95 World Series for the Braves to win. And so he's warming up in the bullpen, and it's the top of the 7th inning, and O'Neill and Tino pinch hit. I'm sorry, first we scored 3 runs, and then we got guys on first and second, and we pinch hit O'Neill for Girardi, and he strikes out, and then they pinch hit Tino, and then he struck out. And Wohlers was warming up the whole time. They struck out against Mike Malecki, and Wohlers was warming up. And I remember when Tino struck out for the 3rd out, I looked at Pat Kelly and I said, well, at least we didn't get swept because we had won game 3. And we figured it was over. Wohlers is coming in. He's going to pitch 2 innings, and we're not going to beat Smoltz, Kevin, and Maddox the next 3 games. It's over with. And we were going to be down 3-1. And then sure enough, the magic happens, and we end up winning that game 4. And I remember Andy Pettitte coming up to me and giving me a big hug and going, thank you. Because if we didn't win this game, I probably wouldn't have slept tonight, because that would have been an elimination game tomorrow. Now I don't have to pitch an elimination game, and I can relax a little bit more. And then, of course, he goes out and pitches probably the greatest game I've ever caught, was that 1-0 game against the Braves in game 5.
Wow. And you were his catcher, right?
I was his personal catcher for 95 and 96. Yeah.
Jim, a lot of kids dream about being a good baseball player at any level, but it's almost beyond people's dreams to imagine wearing the Yankee pinstripes for a living. But for you, a guy who really had to work for everything that he achieved, to play in not 1, but 2 World Series where you hit pivotal home runs to help the Yankees win a World Series. This is an indelible piece of lore, of New York history. How did that feel when you hit that ball? How did it feel when you hit that home run off Wohlers?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was one of those situations where just running around the bases, thinking about, okay, if we win, this is going to be huge. This is going to be the moment that changed everything. And, but we still had to go out there and play, and fortunately, everything kind of happened after that, with Andy Pettitte pitching such a great game, all of these relievers coming in the 1-0 game and keeping the game 1-0. I mean, it was truly a 1 through 25 player comment that made us and helped us win that 1996 World Series. And the one thing great about that 96 World Series, which became the most important thing about that team and the home run, is when the Yankees lost in 97, Mr. Steinbrenner wanted to fire Torre. He wanted to trade Mariano Rivera. And he walked into Gene Michael's office after Mariano gave up the home run to Sandy Alomar in 97 and said, get rid of them. We're starting over, forget it. And Gene Michael said, George, did you forget about last year? 96. And Joe Torre always tells me when he sees me, I loved you when you tell that story, because I would not have had a job in 98 had that 96 team not won. And then the Yankees wouldn't have had that magical 98 season, which they beat me, because I was on the Padres in 98. They beat me in the World Series. They wouldn't have had that run and then that dynasty had we not won in 1996.
You didn't just help the Yankees win a World Series. You helped them kick off a dynasty, literally.
Yeah.
Listen, you had mentioned going up and taking the initiative of introducing yourself to Steinbrenner as a minor leaguer, which was sort of unheard of. you got some chutzpah, Jim. I want to mention something that happened when you were playing for the Padres. Tony Gwynn was your team. He was alpha dog. He was the most experienced dude, and he was a phenomenal Hall of Fame player. But he came in and gave you guys a dressing down at one point about work ethic and blah 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 blah. And you answered him, didn't you?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things that was the quote you said earlier from Trevor Hoffman, that sometimes Jimmy says things that people don't want to hear, but are the truth. And that was our situation. Tony, I got traded there in June. I kept my mouth quiet. I just watched, and they were already one game in first place when I got there. So it wasn't my job to disrupt anything, just play and do your part. And I just remember watching Tony. He wasn't a big vocal leader. He wasn't, but he was Tony Gwynn. I mean, come on, he's one of the greatest players in history. But I'm just watching it, and he was just more of a teammate. And then the last game of the season, we had a really bad September after we clinched. We weren't playing very well, and it was the last game of the season in Arizona, and music was playing. Mark Langston was playing his guitar with Tim Flannery. We were just all kind of having fun, for getting ready for the last game of the season. And Tony took this initiative to be this leader. All of a sudden came in, turned the TVs off, do this, do that. And I was like, whoa, where's this coming from? And everybody kind of bowed down to it. And I kind of said, wait a minute. Hey, Tony, okay, if you want 25 guys on the bench supporting you, then I want you on the bench when you come out in the sixth inning, and all these other guys go in, that you stay out there and you support them.
And what were the other teammates' reaction to when you stepped up and answered him like that?
Kevin Brown and Andy Ashby going, dude, are you crazy? What are you doing? I go, no, I'm just holding him accountable. So sure enough, I said, guys, listen, it's Tony's team. Let's go. Everybody on the bench. So we all went out to the bench. We were all sitting out there. Sure enough, Tony comes out in the sixth inning. I go to pinch hit in the top of the seventh. I come back from pitch hitting, and Ashby and Kevin Brown are going, hey, dude. And I beelined it right up to the locker room. And I said, Tony, what are you doing, man? I go, you gave this big speech, and I appreciate you wanting to be a leader, but you know what? I'm going to hold you accountable here. Get back out there. And sure enough, to his credit, he came back out, and he sat there. And because Andy Ashby and Brownie followed me into the clubhouse to see what was going to happen. And sure enough, he came back out. And then I remember the next day working out in Houston, because we had a day off. We were working out in Houston, and I'm standing over in left field with Ashby and Brown and Trevor and all these guys. And like, hey, Leyritz, I know you got an option for next year, but it was nice playing with you.
Yeah, accountability. Yeah. Did you ever recount that story for George Steinbrenner or your dad?
Well, my dad, of course, has heard the story. Yeah, Mr. Yeah, it's and again, it made the headlines, so it did get out there eventually. And of course, like you said, you read it in my book. And again, it was not a disrespectful thing. Tony Gwynn is Mr. San Diego. Tony Gwynn is Mr. Baseball. And the way the media misconstrued it, that I was saying that, I didn't respect Tony Gwynn, was such an erroneous mistake by the media, that the reason that it got played so bad was that because I was asked to compare Tony to Don Mattingly, and they were completely opposites. And that's where things kind of got screwed up. And I eventually met with Tony and apologized and said, hey, don't believe everything the media wrote. Here's how I said it. And him and I patched it up before he passed away.
Much of the value of what I think somebody like you brings to the table, Jim, particularly for younger people, is that you have this innate instinct and impulse to think for yourself and act for yourself and act righteously. And I think in the world we're in today, that's increasingly valuable. And I think that was very much a part of your legacy: hard work and accountability. I think those are excellent tenets to leave behind, along with a couple of championship winning home runs.
Well,
What? Go ahead.
yeah, for me, I mean, I think the biggest thing was as a player, if you read the book, my book, Catching Heat, like you read it, you can see the transition in my life of being all about me, my career, people sacrificing, like my mom and dad and my brothers and my sisters sacrificing for me to be able to get to the big leagues. You can see that my career, it was all about me. And then the transition, once I had kids and once I had a family, and transitioning to more humility and not so ego driven, that was the biggest transition for me in my life as I progressed as a ball player, as I progressed as becoming a father, and then of course after baseball. The humility that I learned that I didn't always have, during my career, that I had after my career, is really a welcome change in my life. One of the things that has changed the way I approach people, the way I approach life, because you got to remember, as a professional athlete, your career is limited. So when you're in it, it's all about you, and it's only going to last so long. And once that was over with, you have the rest of your life to live. And that's where you have to have the humility that says, okay, I was a ball player, but again, I was just a ball player. Now I'm a father. Now I have to impact people other ways.
As I said, I really enjoyed researching you and reading your book. By the way, folks, the book is Catching Heat. This one's pretty worn because I read it. It went on a couple of planes with me. And I read it a couple of times actually. And I felt like I'm like, there's a guy I really relate to for a lot of different reasons. All baseball aside, at the end of the last page of the book, you said something that I say all the time to my kids and the kids who play for me when I coach. I've learned very little from winning, but I have learned a great deal from losing. Yeah. So true. So true. Tell me about that.
Yeah, those are words from the book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and my pastor, Rick Warren. And it's very true. I mean, you hear athletes talk about getting knocked down 7 times, getting up 8, all these different things. But it's really true that the lessons that you learn, you don't learn when you're on top. When you're on top, everything's great. It's like we always talk about a winning team is you don't know all the problems within the team until you start losing. Then those things come to light. It's the same thing with the lessons that I've learned. I chose a sport to play as a profession that I was going to fail 7 out of 10 times, and really 7.5 in my career out of 10 times, right? That you would still be considered pretty good. There's not too many professions. If I was a doctor and I only saved 2.5 out of 10 patients, I wouldn't have a job very long. So you had to learn how to deal with failure. And I think that taught so many life lessons that, once the game was over with, once I was done playing, that, I was ready for other challenges because I was not afraid to fail. And by failing and continue to fail, I learned more. And that's what made me become more successful.
Well, I think those are, as I said, I think those are incredible lessons. I know those are great lessons for your sons. And I think this is one of the many reasons people who didn't get to watch you play, who are too young, need to read up on you a little bit and study what you're all about. Tell us what you're doing now. Tell us what's going on. I know you're working with the Yankees right now. You're in Manhattan. Tell us what's going on and events in your life and things that are going on.
Yeah, I have a great wife who doesn't mind me traveling. Her and I met each other here in New York years back in 2009 when it was opening day, and at that time I was going through a trial for DUI manslaughter, and that was a 3-year journey that I went on. That was probably one of the most difficult times of my life, but also now in my life, probably one of the experiences that I am so grateful for, except for the accident itself. But everything that has happened to me since then, it has been such a God-given perspective. And I just think that one of the things that I met my current wife now, and I told her I read this book called The Purpose Driven Life. And that was what was helping me get through my trial and everything that I was going through, because I was being wrongly convicted by the state of Florida. And it took 3 years to get to court. Long story short, after we finally got to court, the jury threw it out in 30 minutes. I was found guilty of a DUI, which I was willing to take, but not guilty of the accident, and was free to go. And at that time I had met my wife and girlfriend at the time, and I said, let's go to California with the boys and let's see if this relationship through God and through everything else works. It did. And here we are in 2022. We've been married 7 years. And so I'm living in California. During the baseball season, the Yankees hire me for about 35 or 40 games to come up in the suites to sign autographs for the corporate sponsors and the seat holders, the suite holders. I work for a title company in New York called AmTrust. So I do title insurance for commercial and residential real estate in New York and in California. And it just made sense to take an apartment here and to be here as much as I can to build my business. And then I also have two stepdaughters that one of them is going to pursue her PA, hopefully at Marist College in Poughkeepsie. And then my other daughter is going to be a senior next year and graduate, and she wants to start at FIT. So they're both going to be in New York. So my wife said, you know what, let's take this apartment. We're going to be in New York most of the summers to be able to see our kids. And again, that's what I'm doing. I work for all different charities and foundations. I have in California, I'm on the board of a team. It's called the Teen Project, and it's sexually trafficked girls and women that we bring in. We house them. We try to get them back on their feet. We put them through rehab if they need it. We find them jobs. We educate them. It's a pretty big charity in California. And then I do a lot of work here in New York with the ALS Association. But also, everybody in New York knows that if you want Jim Leyritz at a golf outing and you want to help raise more money for charity, I just did it yesterday at Hank Steinbrenner's charity. God rest his soul. But I was the auctioneer at his charity yesterday to help raise more money, to get people involved, and to be the auctioneer. And so we do things like that year round. I'll probably play in 50 events this year and help raise money for charities and foundations that need financial help.
Wow. So you're not a guy who likes to sit still, are you, Jimmy?
No, you know what? It's one of those things my dad always told me. If you just keep moving, you'll never age.
Yeah, good for you. And by the way, I apologize for not mentioning your stepdaughters. I knew you had sons. I wasn't aware you had stepdaughters. So you've got a big family, man. You got a big growing family.
Yeah, we were a Brady Bunch for about 6 years.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And of course, the case I know all about because I read the book. On another conversation, we could get into that, but that your makeup, your inner drive, your faith in God and yourself and your parents and your children got you through that incredibly difficult time. And I commend you for coming out the way you did. I give you a lot of credit. I think you're doing great things. I think you're a great example to kids for, looking at anybody, a public figure of any kind. I believe pro athletes are role models, whether they want to be or not. And I think you're handling it wonderfully. And
thank you.
Jim Leyritz, your inner drive and strength are exemplary, and I believe made you a remarkable representative of this incredible place that we now call New York, your home away from home, the city that you fell in love with. You also remind us that this public life, in this case, as a pro athlete, which can seem, as we said, so glamorous and glorious, has a real other side to it. And that in spite of the 11 years you spent in the big leagues, you struggled, you fought, as we said, for every at bat, for every stat, every bit of respect you got, and you earned every bit of it. And I am so happy for the direction your life has taken and the wonderful examples that you've set as a person, as a father, as a husband, as a human being. Well done. I commend you. And I thank you so much for taking this time to talk to me here. It was an absolute honor to get to spend this time and to hear your stories. So please stay in touch, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
I appreciate that. Listen, behind every good man is a great woman, and I have one in my wife, Michelle, and she and I, our relationship is one of the reasons why we can have this kind of lifestyle, because of the love and respect that we have for each other, and it wouldn't be the same without her.
That's beautiful. I must say, I know what you mean. I have the same situation. So thank you so much, Jim. You take care, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Yankee legend Jim Leyritz, everyone. What an impressive guy. Thank you so much for being here, Jim. The book is Catching Heat, the Jim Leyritz story, and is available at all major booksellers, as well as on his website, JimLeyritz.com, where you can also find out about everything that Jim's doing with appearances, events, charities, and his own podcast, the Catching Heat Podcast. Find out everything that's happening with this very hardworking Yankee alum. Be sure to log into his site and follow along the many great things that he's doing. I also want to thank my friend Mike Polsky of Polsky Sports and Entertainment for facilitating this interview. Thank you, Michael. Please follow Polsky Sports and Entertainment on Instagram. Damas and Aaron, this is Island Voices, examining the incredible history of the island of Manhattan and talking to some of the people who have helped to make it incredible. Please be sure to subscribe on YouTube, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Climb aboard. History is cool. Island Voices is a production of Chance Kelly and Chance Kelly Inc. and may not be reproduced or rebroadcast without written authorization. Thank you.